Thank you. Thank you, Siri, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invite to this wonderful conference. I've been to Norway in this job on so many occasions, I can't quite count. But I'm afraid I haven't mastered the language, so whilst it seems a very impressive conference, I can't quite claim to have followed all of the proceedings so far. But I would like to congratulate NSM on hosting this event, and indeed for providing, I think, the largest screen on which I've ever featured. I know there's a lot of casework going on, a big issue in the headlines at the moment, and I hope that colleagues here in Oslo, in NSM and in the wider Norwegian government are finding that international partners, including the UK, are reaching out and helping, because that's what we do in international cybersecurity. So it's a pleasure to be here. It's a pity that my colleague and friend Kjetil Nielsen isn't able to be here, who invited me, but I'd like to pay a warm tribute to his leadership over many years of not just Norwegian but European cybersecurity. It is, however, a real pleasure to be accompanied by another very close colleague, Guillaume Poupard. As already alluded to, thank you for getting the Brexit question out of the way within 5 seconds of mentioning me. Whatever future form the UK's relationship with the rest of this continent takes, and whenever that becomes known, I think Guillaume and I are confident that UK-French cybersecurity cooperation is on the right track, but also so is UK-Norwegian cooperation, and that reflects an unconditional commitment to the security of this continent, whatever relationship Norway and the UK have with the European Union. I will come back a little bit to international cooperation at the end. Finally, by way of introduction, a word of apology. I hope you can follow me. I'm from the UK, but I'm from a quite peripheral part of the UK. I'm just from the northern side of the Irish border. It used to be an obscure area of Europe. It's now rather better known. And there are two things you need to know about the Irish border. One is it has the capacity to bring the British political system into a great degree of confusion. I think you know that. The second thing is people from there speak with quite distinctive and quite thick accents, so I do hope you can follow me. Enough of that. My job is threefold as head of the National Cybersecurity Centre, and I'm going to say a little bit of each, about each, but with typical eccentricity, I'm going to talk about them in the wrong order. The first thing we have to do is, as the National Cybersecurity Centre, is to manage incidents. We will get attacked in cyberspace, and we need to manage that. We didn't have an incident management function in government until 2016 when the NCSC was set up. We learned some painful lessons, so that's the first thing, and part of that is knowing who's attacking us. Secondly, from a national risk point of view, there are things that we care about more than others. To give you an example from government, I'm old enough to have joined government service in the pre-digital age, in the 90s, where we had classification security rules, where anything marked official, the loss of that on a train was a security incident. That is, I mean, it was nonsense then, in my view, but it's completely impossible nonsense now. There is data that doesn't matter, and there are data and capabilities and information and systems that matter more, and there are some that matter a great deal. And if you're in charge of national cybersecurity risk, as I am operationally, you have to work out which of those you can do something about directly, do that directly, and then take it from there and do what you can to help everybody else look after themselves. And that leads, I think, to the third point, which is actually, I think, one of the most interesting part of our mission, which is to make the internet safer and make it easier to use safely. I'll come on to that, but if I have one message today, is that cybersecurity is shrouded in myth and fear, and that is one of the most harmful things that we can let happen. We need to be able to manage this, and we need to find ways of making the internet easier to use safely, but also to make it automatically safer. The final thing in terms of our mission is to do only what the government can do. Estimates of the global cybersecurity industry vary wildly, but it's at least $100 billion by most reasonable estimates. That's quite a lot of money, and there's quite a lot of good and clever people working on it. What can the government do that commercially available capability can't? So I'm going to start briefly with how we manage incidents and who is attacking us. And there are two parts to this. And this is part one. It's the glamorous part. There's the nation states, the bad actors. In the UK's case, we've talked most about Russia. We had the horrific chemical weapons attack in Salisbury last year. But as part of announcing that, along with US, Australian, and other partners, when we expose some of the nefarious activity, we also expose some of the less visible activity on cybersecurity in terms of attacks on critical national infrastructure. So that's what the politics of it looks like in terms of major announcements, public attributions, and so on. But this is what the technicalities look like. This is quite interesting because it's much less arresting to look at than the previous pictures. But these are major campaigns against UK critical national infrastructure. And if you go through those different pages, what you'll find is technical indicators, published formal indicators of compromise that an organization can look at, can run through their system and say, have we got the Russians on our system? And if you find them, you can take them away. When I asked the people who were responsible for compiling that data and publishing it with us, what classification would it have been 5 years ago? They said mostly secret or above. But now we are taking it and we're declassifying it and we're putting it out there so that people can mitigate the risk. So that's one part of it. It goes beyond Russia. We have threats from China. We find Russia largely attacking us for, if you like, strategic, traditional statecraft reasons. China more for economic reasons. The other two main states we worry about are Iran, which can retaliate asymmetrically if it feels threatened. North Korea, which used to do that, but now tends to be more of a threat to the financial system because it wants to steal money from through cyber attacks. So those are the big four in terms of cyber attack. But there are thematic risks as well as risks of deliberate hostile activity. Because in the 2.5 years I've been in, I've headed the NCSC. I've been in charge of UK cybersecurity for 5 years. The biggest incident we've had to deal with was North Korean, but it was reckless. It wasn't deliberate. It was WannaCry in the middle of 2017. For those who remember WannaCry, it was a ransomware attack gone wrong, a badly executed ransomware attack. That is its global impact. The UK dimension was focused on the health sector, the state-run health sector. This, to my mind, is conclusive proof that this hugely disruptive global attack was an accident. Because if you're trying to raise money through blackmailing people and extorting people, which is best done in private, then attacking the British Health Service is about the stupidest target you could have thought of on the entire planet that we have in front of you. Not pettier, a more serious attack, a Russian attack on Ukraine, then spread beyond the intent of the attackers. Recklessness is a real risk, as is the proliferation of cyber tools. So that's the first part of the threat, the big state threat. But the second part is everybody in this room, including me, is much more likely to encounter that than they are the Russians. That's your classic cybercrime, that little bit of ransomware, that little bit of stealing data or so forth, that sort of stateless activity that just says, we're not going to blow up the power grid, we're not going to, take out hospitals, we're not going to use cyber as a tool of war, but every second of every day we're going to just do attacks on data, on money, on information, on just subtly eroding people's confidence in the digital infrastructure. Each and every one of those attacks is of zero strategic significance in and of itself. Add them all up and you've got a serious national problem because people might lose confidence in the digital economy. And ubiquitous and growing transnational cybercrime, which is often based outside friendly jurisdictions with whom we have a law enforcement arrangement, is one of the biggest strategic threats. So that's our view of the threat. As we manage incidents in part one of this talk, as we manage incidents, whether they're from those states or whether they're from criminals, we learn. And I'm not, in the interest of time, going to tell you everything we've learned. I'm just going to tell you one thing. So we've managed about 600 incidents a year. So from the 1,200 incidents in our first 2 years, here is one of the things we've learned. This is a major Chinese cyber attack that we attributed in December 2018, so-called Cloud Hopper. It turns out, we know from the Japanese authorities, that the way it entered into some Japanese networks was somebody sending a Word document infected with the so-called Melissa virus as a way in. The Melissa virus dates from 2000. Any modern version of Microsoft Office would automatically block it. So clearly, in those systems, they weren't running modern versions of Microsoft Office. They deployed something called the Quasar Rat in flat networks, which meant that an attack that got through in Japan could get through to anywhere else on a global network. You then download this for a few $100s off the internet. That should be detectable, but it wasn't. So that's a nation-state attack using a 19-year-old virus and a further attack tool bought off the internet for a few $100s. Hold that thought. This example is from the criminal end of the sphere. In the UK, one of the most significant cyber attacks in terms of public awareness was an attack in 2015 on the telecoms company TalkTalk. It was done using an SQL injection, a SQL injection. That's a basic guide about how you do that. It involves typing very basic code into an instruction box on a website and telling it to go and search for something. That dates from 1998. When the attack took place in 2015, the attacker was 15 years old. He's since been convicted in the criminal justice system. So the attacker was younger than the tool he was using. So whether you have the nation state of the People's Republic of China, or you have a 15-year-old in the United Kingdom in his bedroom, they were both exploiting really basic vulnerabilities that are known. That's the one lesson I want to hold from this part of the presentation, because it means that the one thing we need to be able to do, this isn't okay. It's not okay that a 15-year-old can disrupt a major telco network, and it's not okay that the Chinese state doesn't have to work any harder than the 15-year-old to disrupt some major global managed service providers. Basic cybersecurity is too weak. We know that. That is not just an assertion. We would go as far as to say that is proof. Those incidents are proof. This is all open source. So what do we do about it? I'm going to skip to part 3. We have to make the internet safer and easier to use safely. I normally show a different slide, but we're in Norway, so I chose the Scream. This is the problem with cybersecurity. People are terrified of it. We tell sophisticated business leaders who get oil out of the ground, or they get oil out of the sea. They get, they manage hundreds of millions of dollars of complex financial assets. They do that really well. We tell them they can't manage a computer network, so they have to hire somebody. They don't need to understand it. Well, let's try and understand it a bit. So for this audience, I apologize for the next slide, but I just did a screenshot of a classic iPhone security update. Why? Because that's the message I want to give out to everybody. Anybody can understand the following. Every time you get one of those, it is sending a message that you're connected to something called the internet, and that has insecurities. Many, if not the vast majority of those insecurities, are based on mistakes or things that were unknown at the time. Some of them are based on malicious intent, but many of them aren't. And that is telling you how to fix it. So just stop believing all the hype, stop believing all the nonsense about how to do cybersecurity, and just think of the consequences of that. That is showing you that you've got something that has insecurities and vulnerabilities, and there are fixes. But essentially it means you've got something in your pocket that gives you a great deal of opportunity and capability, but it carries risks, and you manage the risk totally. And this has led us to something called the Automated Cyber Defense Program. Because if you keep the thought, I'll rush through this in the interest of time, but if you keep the thought that about the NCSE doing only what the government can do, we want to protect the majority of the people from the majority of the harm caused by the majority of the attacks the majority of the time. To put it even more simply than that, we want to make the state actors work harder to achieve the effect and to stop the teenager being able to carry out the attacks at all because the stuff's fixed. There is a market problem. The $100 billion cybersecurity industry doesn't fix everything because sometimes the commercial incentives aren't there. So rather than go through all of these, I will just give you a few examples. But the first bit of this slide is really important because What we've been doing in the past is we've been telling people, you are the problem. You, the user, are the problem. There's a senior British politician who was the Attorney General for a while. He once won an impossible case in the European Court of Justice on prisoner voting. Everyone thought he would lose it. He argued complex areas of law in French, unusual for a Brit to do it in a foreign language. And he told me that he couldn't use the government IT security because the security requirements were too onerous. And traditionally, we've blamed him. Obviously, I've just proved to you he's quite a clever guy. If he can't use the IT because the security requirements are too onerous, that's our fault, not his. So we've made it too hard for people to use safely. So what are we going to do about this? We know as part of the National Security Agency that there are lots of bad sites on the internet. So we ask people to take them down. That's an example of using a company to take down these websites. Those are the results. We've taken down more than 200,000 websites. The average time for them to be up has gone down from just over a day to just over an hour. That is the UK's share of global phishing attacks that we've seen in the period to date. So just from just over 5.5% to just over 2%. And what that means is when you click on a dodgy link and we've managed to have it taken down, it just doesn't go there. The user doesn't have to do anything. We've made it easier for smaller organizations to do cybersecurity safely. This is something we give free to small public authorities to tell them how to check for those sorts of vulnerabilities that the teenager used and to go and fix them. And we've found nearly 4,000 major problems in government networks and we've fixed them. This one's interesting. Spoofing, identity abuse, is at the heart of cyber attack. I send you something that you should trust, that you're supposed to trust even though you shouldn't, but you don't know how to. Our tax authority was the 16th most spoofed brand in the world. And we worked with it to implement the DMARC protocol to tell the internet distribution mechanisms, this is what a genuine email from the UK tax authority should look like. And if it doesn't look like this, don't deliver it, send it to us. And we collected 500 million of them in the first full year of this operation. And that's 500 million fewer times that someone sitting in front of their inbox had to make a judgment about whether or not they should click on a dodgy link. This is a screenshot of my phone. We've put automatic protection from known bad destinations on the internet on 600 public authorities. So if you click on a dodgy link, and this is me, I'm the head of the National Cybersecurity Centre, and I clicked on a dodgy link because people don't know what a dodgy link looks like, then if we know the destination to be bad, we will stop you from going there. Last week, we checked more than 4 billion attempts to query to sites, and we blocked 1 million of them, and we judged that would have, that's prevented around 1,200 cybersecurity incidents. So that's how we make the internet infrastructure safer. But making it easier to use is important too. Password policy, as we've known it for most of this century, has been mad. It's been, I'm going to make it really hard for you to get on my network so that my network can be safe. That would work if each of us only used one network, but we use about 25 in our personal and professional lives. We interact with lots of them. We are asking people to do the impossible. So we've changed password guidance, and we've advocated the use of password managers. Banks weren't allowing people to use password managers. And a year after we changed our advice, this is a Twitter exchange that had nothing to do with us, where someone said to Barclays, one of the biggest banks in the UK, I can't use a password manager. Your own government says I should be able to. They said, oh, okay. And then they went and they changed it. We're sorry for the slow response. So that's how you get behavior change. Internet banking's safer because of that. And it's because it's easier to use. Moving swiftly on, this very boring document is actually potentially quite an opportunity. This is our digital department, and it's a code of conduct for the Internet of Things. People talk again because people want to spread myth and fear so they can sell products and so on. Oh, the Internet of Things means instead of having 5 billion internet devices, we'll have 25 billion, so that's a 5-fold increase in the risk. Maybe. But the Internet of Things also means you can pay. You pay more with cash rather than data for services. So what does that mean? It means we can put in place security standards. Consumers can make informed choices about security. So ultimately, we're looking to get a sort of food package labeling for Internet of Things products so that you will know that the cheaper version might be cheaper, it might be okay to use, but its security will be up in 6 months, whereas the slightly more expensive version has verified high standard security, but it will, and it will lead you to maybe 2025. So that is a package of work that we're doing to try to make the internet automatically safer and to stop making it hard for people to use. So then to finish, it's what do we care about most, and what do we do to help everyone else protect themselves? What can an organization in a government, in a country of 66 million people with an agency of fewer than 1,000 actually do? So I've mentioned that we give critical national infrastructure detailed information of state attacks, but we also try to build in resilience. So as we build more and more internet-connected systems, such as smart meters, we've published details about how we say you can't make a smart meter system completely safe from cyber attack, but you can make it resilient. If you build a smart meter system so that an attack on one bit of it could plunge the whole country into darkness, then you've built it wrong. And so we've published evidence, and we've published how we've architected the network to be resilient. So you'd have to attack it 3 times, is the doctrine. To do national level damage, you'd have to attack it 3 times to nation-state standard. And in the current controversy that we'll no doubt touch on in the panel session about Huawei, that's the sort of philosophy we're applying. Whatever decision the government takes on Huawei, and we haven't taken a decision yet, what I feel passionately about is that 5G networks need to be resilient. We need to make sure that an attack on any part of the network, whoever the supplier is, whoever the operator is, whoever the service provider is, doesn't end up scuppering the whole network. So that's what we do directly in terms of direct intervention with the critical assets that we care about most. We have a large economy. So I'm just going to finish by mentioning something we're launching today, which is a board toolkit. If I'm to be critical of the sort of advice the UK government was giving corporations 5-10 years ago on cybersecurity, it would be to say that we were sort of telling them, cybersecurity, you should treat this seriously, and you should talk about it at board level, and you should manage risk. Well, I'm sure these people found that advice very helpful. Actually, we need to help people understand the risk. We need to help boards and corporate leaders get a little bit technical so they understand what they're talking about. So here are 5 questions, and I'm going to pick one, just the top one. How do you manage phishing attacks? Most people will tell you, well, we manage phishing attacks because we hired a company and they sent fake emails to all our staff, and we trained them, and in year 1 it was 20% clicked, and in year 2 it's 10%. We're twice as good as we were last year, maybe. But we tell them, first, if that 10% who clicked on it in year 2 include the systems administrator, whereas the 20% who clicked on it in year 1 didn't, I'd rather have the bigger figure, because if you compromise the people who run the network, you're owned, you're completely compromised. So it matters who is attacked, not just how many. And secondly, none of these exercises ever result in 0 attacks. And that's why we tell people, and there's a very good blog as to why trying to prevent all phishing attacks by training your staff is pointless. You should train staff to be aware of the risks of phishing attacks, but don't base your whole defenses on it, because as this blog shows, even the most technically astute people can get spoofed, because some of these attacks can be really good. So instead of basing your defenses on the assumption that you can block out all attacks, you should assume that you will be attacked and work out how to manage the risk. So to go back to this for a second, if you're interested in the UK government's advice to companies, then later today there will be a full board toolkit on our website, ncsc.gov.uk, about the way we want to treat cyber as a business risk. So to finish, I know I've gone through this at racing speed. The final thing we tell organizations, which is very much on your radar today, is, of course, how would you manage an incident? That has relatively little to do with cybersecurity and a lot to do with business continuity and a lot to do with communications. But I think we have a vision in the UK of government and industry and internationally working together to do 3 things. One is, let's work together at government level to get after the really, really bad people, to get after the most malevolent actors. There are some pretty lethal capabilities out there in cyberspace, and we have to try to stop them. The second thing is, let's try to work together to make the internet automatically safer. It was not designed with security in mind, but there are things we can do. And the third thing is, let's try and make sure collectively we're not scared of this problem. We just say it's a risk. The digital world is a big opportunity, but there are some risks. And all we need to do is apply our clever minds in a cooperative way to manage those risks. And I look forward to working with colleagues here in Norway on that agenda into the future. Thank you very much.